Hello everyone, and welcome to March Viking Club here at the Stitch and Post. We're so glad that all of you took time to join us. We have a couple of topics, actually 3 topics for you this morning that we think you will enjoy. The first one is we have a trunk show of quilts from 10 Sisters Handicraft that we're going to be showing you and talking a little bit about the technique that's used to make those quilts. We have a segment on sewing with knits with some tips and techniques that Stacy is going to be showing you. And then our final segment is a guest appearance, a virtual guest appearance by Lisa Hawks of Pink Hollybush Design. She does patterns for children's garments that are designed for knits, and they're designed so that they can be smocked. So we are going to be sharing all of those things with you this morning, and I'd like to start off by talking about 10 Sisters. 10 Sisters Handicraft was founded by Carmen Geddes, and we met Carmen several years ago at Quilt Market in Houston. She is a delightful person, and we loved her quilts, and we enjoyed visiting with her about how she does her quilts, the techniques that are used. And so the bottom line is 10 Sisters quilts are built around fusible gridded interfacing. So Carmen produces this fusible grid in different sizes, either a 1-inch finished square, a 1.5-inch finished square, or a 2-inch finished square grid. And there's actually even a little tiny 1/2-inch finished square grid, which I haven't tried that one yet, but it would make a very cute teeny project like a pincushion. So you use the grid, you lay out your fabric squares according to the instructions in the pattern that you're using, and it creates a foundation for your quilt that enables you to piece very easily and match your seams perfectly with almost no effort. So Carmen has a bunch of free patterns and very inexpensive patterns available for download on her website, and she has also done several books. The first book that she did is called 10 Quilts for 10 Sisters. And yes, indeed, there are, in fact, 10 sisters in the family. Carmen is one of the sort of middle to older girls here in the picture. And yes, she has 9 sisters. And so in the book, there's a quilt pattern that's dedicated to each one of her sisters and one dedicated to herself. And when you look at these patterns, they have a layout that shows you where to put your different colored fabrics on the foundation grid, and you end up sort of like putting a puzzle together. When you put these panels together, it creates your whole quilt, and the number of panels you need depends on the size of the quilt that you're making. Also, the size of the grid that you choose will determine the size of your finished quilt. So obviously a smaller grid will be a smaller quilt, a bigger grid will yield a bigger quilt. So this was her first book. I think the second book was this one, 7 Brothers Block Party. And of course the next question was 7 brothers, and the answer was yes. She also has 7 brothers. So she has 9 sisters and 7 brothers. And this book has a really nice array of different kinds of block quilts, star blocks, a lot of quilts other than just quilts using basic square shapes, but they are still made using the gridded interfacing product. And you see here this wide variety of beautiful blocks that are used in the quilts in this book. So that's 7 Brothers Block Party. She then did Quilts for Kids, and as the name implies, this one has a number of cute quilts for babies and children. and we're going to be showing you a couple of those in the trunk show. And then her most recent book is called Around the Block Quilts, and the patterns in this book use her newest grid, fusible grid product, which is actually a border panel. So the principle is the same. It's marked off in squares, but it's a long piece rather than a sort of shorter rectangular piece. So you can use it for actually making a quilt border for any quilt that you might be making, or you can use it to make strips for instance, a row quilt. So we're going to be looking at a couple of quilts in the trunk show that are from this book, Around the Block Quilts. So I would like to walk around and show you the quilts, let you take a good close-up look at them, and I'm going to start over on this side so that I don't forget any. This first large quilt hanging here is called Boston Commons. This is from the book Around the Block Quilts, so it does use the border panels. And this is just it's just a great old-fashioned pattern. I know Stacy mentioned that she has a quilt that I believe was made by her grandmother, who fussy cut many of the fabrics and used different fabrics all the way around on each row, and it just makes a really, really beautiful, very special quilt. And you can see the lines of quilting. She's done an all-over pattern with arcs that I think lends itself nicely. Again, that one is from the book Around the Block Quilts. This is actually an unfinished one that she put in so that you could get an idea what the process kind of looks like as it's underway. This is Pixel Craft, or Minecraft is the name of this quilt. It was a pattern that was available on her website for download. I'm not sure whether this one is still available.
It was yesterday.
Okay, I think it may be still available. Pixel Craft or Minecraft would be the name of it. The next two small projects here are, again, downloads from the Ten Sisters website. This one is Be Unique, and Cindy put this one together using a 1-inch finished grid panel, one little black sheep. There's always got to be one black sheep in every family. And I think this turned out really, really cute. And Cindy pointed out that if you used a little bit bigger grid, maybe the 1.5-inch finished grid, this would be big enough to be a very sweet baby quilt. So that is Be Unique, and that pattern is a download on the website. Below that, we have the Scrappy Spool, and that is also available for download in this version and in a smaller version called, I think, the Little Spool. And you see that this does use a couple of half square triangles here, and then the rest is entirely squares. And I had a lot of fun putting that together. The next quilt is called Happy Hedgehog. And we've been really admiring this one. It's really cute. It is from the book Quilts for Kids. And the quilting on this one is, I think, really, really nice. The hedgehog is done with the little curly cues, and then the up and down lines or back and forth lines on his feet and his facial features and his ear, and then the little circular pattern on the blocks in the background. So all of this background is made from individual squares, again, put together using the grid. So that is the Happy Hedgehog from Quilts for Kids. The next one might be my favorite in the trunk show. This is called Next Door Neighbor's Medallion, and this is from Around the Block Quilts. And this one, this one is made using the border panels for piecing. And you see you have the center block with surrounding blocks, and then you build more and more borders out to the edges of the quilt. So this is Next Door Neighbor's Medallion from Around the Block Quilts. And I'm going to let my cameraman come up and give a close-up of quilting on this one. Some really, really nice quilting in these samples. Very nicely done in 30s fabrics. Really lends itself to this quilt. So that is from Around the Block Quilts, Next Door Neighbor's Medallion. The next quilt is called Sly the Fox, and he is from Quilts for Kids as well. Cute little kind of pixelated fox. Foxes are very big. Again, a really nice job of quilting. I think any little one would be thrilled with this. It's a good sized quilt. It's a little bigger than the typical baby quilt, so it would be great for a toddler or a little bit older child. Sly the Fox from Quilts for Kids. And the next quilt is Granny's Scrappy Rose. And this really reminds me of something that my mother would have made. It's a beautiful quilt. I love the yellow background and the rows of squares set on point that are totally scrappy is really, really beautiful. The feather quilting is wonderful. And then she's done the scalloped edge, the scalloped border on this quilt. And you see that she has piping in her binding. One of the notions that Carmen produces is it's a piping tool. It's the Ten Sisters piping tool. For some time we had a piping trimmer ruler that was made by Dar, and it's no longer available. So we're really pleased to have the Ten Sisters piping tool, which allows you to make your piping and trim it to exactly the seam allowance that's needed when you add it to your quilt binding or when you add it to a garment that you might be making. So if you didn't have that previous edition of a piping trimmer ruler, I strongly encourage you to consider the Ten Sisters piping tool. So that one is Granny's Scrappy Rose from Around the Block Quilts. The last quilt in the trunk show is Carmen's Mosaic, and it is from the 10 Quilts for 10 Sisters book. It has used the 1-inch finished grid to put together these wonderful, wonderful vintage 30s fabrics with the black accent. And again, this quilt has piping on the binding, which really does add a lot to the finished product, I think, on this quilt. If you used a bigger grid, you could do this same quilt and it would yield a larger quilt. This one is the 1-inch, so it would be considerably bigger if you went up to the 2-inch finished. All of those dimensions are listed in the books along with the patterns. All right, so we're going to go back over here and talk a little bit about the technique that is involved in actually utilizing this gridded fusible interfacing product. So first of all, you need to cut your squares, and you can do that however you choose. If you have an AccuQuilt cutter, you are in really good shape. This is a 1.5-inch square die from AccuQuilt that would finish at 1 inch. So you can cut 6 layers of fabric at a time if you choose to, and there are 9 squares here. So if you do the math on that, 9 times 6, I believe, is 54 squares every pass through the cutter. And if you get out your scraps and you do that, you too can end up with an entire box full of 1.5-inch squares in a variety of scrappy fabrics. When I cut the squares to make my spool quilt over here, I got a little carried away, and so yeah, I have a lot of leftover squares, but they're really fun to get out and use, and so I'm enjoying them. So the first step in the process is to look at your pattern, pick out the squares that you need, and place them on the fusible side of the grid within the grid lines. Now, you'll notice here, if we can get a close-up, you'll see that they don't fully fill the squares here, and that's fine. That's actually a good thing. You want to try to get your squares in there where they are within that dotted grid line. You can get your pieces all laid out on your grid, and then if you choose, you can use a glue stick, just a regular school glue stick, and put a tiny bit of glue on just to temporarily hold those pieces in place while you're auditioning, or in case you have to stop in the middle, so that they will stay where you want them until you have a chance to fuse them down. Once you have everything in its final position, then you're going to fuse the fabric to the fusible interfacing. I like to use a Teflon pressing sheet when I do this, and be careful not to get fusible on my iron. I have 2 different irons, and I have one that I use for projects like this. So you do want to be careful about getting the fusible glue on your iron. So once your little squares are fused to the grid, everything is stable, and you are ready to start sewing. The way that works is, usually I tend to sew vertically first. So fold the grid with the fabric right sides together, and you can see that it naturally folds along that dotted line in between the fabric squares. So if I fold this, I think you can see how the dotted line is right along the edge of the fold, and that's what you want to have when you start sewing. So you fold it, you don't need to pin, just fold it, take it to your sewing machine, and stitch your 1/4-inch seam. And you're stitching a 1/4 inch from the dots. So if your fabric was slightly inside that, that's perfectly fine, because your seam allowance is going to be accurate according to the folded edge of the grid. Once you stitch your vertical rows, then you're going to come back with your scissors, and if I were at home, I would use a small pair of scissors, but I don't have my small ones here with me. You're going to clip at the intersection between each of these squares, and it's not difficult. You don't have to be accurate or careful, because if you accidentally cut your threads, it's not going to matter, because they're going to be in your seam allowance on your next step. So once you've clipped here between each of these, I think you can now see that this seam allowance has become segmented, so it's in separate little segments. That's important because it allows you in your next step to press these seam allowances in one direction, opposite direction, back and forth between each row, so that each row is facing an opposite direction. Once that's done, you make your next fold, and I would obviously have the rest of these rows stitched. I just wanted to leave part of it so that you could see what it looks like before it's stitched. But if you fold here along the horizontal dotted line, you see now that those seams nest perfectly together with the seam allowances going in opposite directions. So once I had all of this stitched, I would then stitch across horizontally on all of my seams, and I would press those flat, and I would have my completed panel. So if you're doing a project that's larger, that involves multiple panels, there are some different ways that you can stitch those together. You can fuse them together first, or you can just stitch them with a 1/4-inch seam allowance once you've trimmed them down. Carmen has a number of really excellent videos on her YouTube channel that talk about the different techniques, and some of them are specific to particular quilt patterns in the books. I think you would find all of those very helpful. So I hope you'll give this a try. I would encourage you to maybe start with a smaller project, either one of the download patterns or maybe a quilt from the Quilts for Kids book that would be a little bit more manageable project. If you've ever made a Mondo bag, it's kind of a similar process. It's a lot of fun. I found it thoroughly enjoyable, and we would be happy to help you and answer any questions that you might have regarding this technique. I will post on our YouTube channel a link to a couple of Carmen's videos so that you can get an idea how helpful those are. So, thank you for joining us for this segment on 10 Sisters Quilts, and we will be moving on to the next segment in our Viking Club.
Hi, I'm Stacy, and I wanted to talk to you today about sewing on knits. I love wearing knits just like most of you, and it makes me feel good to make garments that I like to wear and that fit well, and knits fit that bill. So I want to talk to you today about some tips and techniques to make sewing on knits easy for you. First and foremost, if you own a serger, use it. Sergers were made for knits, and they make the job just simple. You can construct your garment in one step. It will sew the seam and finish the edges all in one step. The new sergers on the market, like this one, the Amber Air 400, is air threading. It's simple. It's nothing like the serger you saw years and years ago when they first came out. So come by and let us show you this one if you're interested in sewing garments. The next thing I wanted to tell you is if you don't have a serger, it's not an impossible task to sew knits. Most machines have a stretch stitch, which will help keep your seams from popping and breaking. Also, there are threads on the market like this Maxi Lock stretch, and I'll show you. It's got a little fuzzy texture to it. You can use this thread either in your serger or in the needle on your sewing machine, and you see it stretches a bit, and that will make your garment sewing easier. Also, on shoulder seams, they run the crosswise grain of the knit, and sometimes they tend to stretch a bit. You've had that in garments that you buy. One way to stop that is to use a woven stay tape in the shoulders. You simply lay this in the seam line and sew through it. So it doesn't matter if you're sewing on the sewing machine or if you're using the serger, just enclose this tape in the shoulder seam to help keep that from stretching out of shape. Also, if you don't have a serger, you could use a walking foot, and I have done this on quite a few garments. There's a walking foot available for all machines. The way this works, it hooks over your needle bar, and it acts like feed dogs on the top. So it will pull your knit layers through your sewing machine at an even rate. You know, when you try to sew on knits and it kind of pulls the top and you get puckers, you can avoid that if you'll use a walking foot. There are several sole plate options for the walking foot, so even if you're using a serger and you want to go back and top stitch the neckline or hem with a double needle or even a single needle, you can use other sole plates to help you with that. This one has a guide in the middle, which is great for that top stitching along the ribbing at the neckline. When you're ready to cut your knits out, some people are very confident with a rotary cutter, and cutting knits with a rotary cutter is a good option. There are a lot of straight lines on knits. Be sure and use a ruler and use your rotary cutter with the ruler to cut out your patterns. When you get to the curves, if you're confident enough to cut, go for it. If not, I like to use micro serrated scissors. They grip your knit so you don't get layers that are cut unevenly. These are dressmaker shears, so they're flat on the bottom, so you don't have to pick up your pattern and your fabric to cut. You can leave it laying on the table. You'll get a nice smooth cut, and these are great. Make sure you have some micro serrated scissors at hand. Now, when you're sewing knits, you want to use a stretch needle, the ballpoint, stretch, jersey needles. The difference is they have a rounded tip and it won't poke a hole in your knit. Some knits might run if you poke holes in them, so make sure you're using a ballpoint needle. For hems, some of my garments have a straight hem, don't see one, using a single needle. And others I've hemmed using this double needle. When you're picking a double needle, you want to pick one that says stretch. And the first number, the 2.5, is the distance between the needles. So when you look at a garment that's been hemmed with a double needle, that's the distance between the two rows that show on the outside of the garment. The 75 is the size. I like to use a small needle on knits. A 75 or an 80 is a good choice. So when picking patterns, you should most always use a pattern specifically designed for knits. If you look at these patterns, they all have very simple lines, and that makes it easy to construct. That's because most knits have four-way stretch, some have two-way stretch, so you don't want a lot of detail. If you picked a woven fabric pattern, it will have more detail, like maybe collar bands or collars that you have to turn with points. Those are a little harder to manipulate. They do look great if you want to take the time to do those. I have some knit shirts with a lot of shirt detail, but I'm most comfortable in just a pullover knit shirt with a neckband. That's another issue. A lot of people complain they have problems sewing neckbands on. They look ruffled after they've completed it. There's a little trick to that. If you will judge the stretch of your knit, say you have 4 inches of knit and you stretch it to 5 inches, that's a 25% stretch. Use that formula for your neckband. If your neckband is 10 inches, which that's very small, you want to deduct 25% of that. Cut your neckband that length across the grain of your knit and divide it into equal segments. So you will have the seam and the front, match those 2 points together, and you have the side seams of your neckband. Those points on the side may not necessarily line up with the shoulder seam because they're usually a little back or a little forward. But if you're quartering your neckband and quartering your neck opening, match those points and stretch it in between to make it fit. It may freak you out a bit while you're sewing it together that you're having to stretch so much, but when you take it off the machine and you give it a good final press, it will lay nice and smooth and you won't get that ruffled neckband at the top. You can also see on a lot of these I've put a little row of top stitching underneath the seam on the neckband. That just makes it look a little more ready-made or more professional. I'm going to show you some of my favorite garments now. When the shirt I have on right now is this pattern, it's quick sew. And it calls for a fabric band, ruffle on the bottom, but I've used one of our Swiss embroidered eyelets, and you could do that to make a fancier garment. This pattern is now out of print, but there are a few of them left. One of our favorite basic t-shirt patterns is this Lark t-shirt from Grain Line Studios. If you look at these two models, Patty has made this white t-shirt with a scoop neckline out of Sea Island knit from the Lark pattern. She constructed this totally on the sewing machine. She doesn't have a serger. So take a moment to look at that if that's the option you choose. You can see she used a twin needle to do her hem, and there are tricks for that to help with tunneling. She also did the top stitch at the neckband to make it lay down nice and flat. Okay, this pattern is also the Lark, and we've just patchworked the front with some of our great batik knits. These are all cotton knits. They're very substantial, they feel great. We cut rectangles, made a fabric, and then cut the front out of the patchwork fabric we made. So this is the Lark pattern. It's also hemmed with a double needle. Let me show you. When you do that, you fold up your hem, stitch with a double needle from the front, and then you can go back and trim off the excess. The knits aren't going to run. They're not going to go anywhere. If you look at ready-made garments, that's what they've done most of the time. That technique also works on the sleeves. Another one of our favorite patterns here at the store is this. It's from C&T Designs. It is the Simple Elegant Tee. This is one of the patterns here that's made for wovens and knits. This garment is cut in one piece. If you see, there are no shoulder seams. The only seam on this garment is under the arm. It has several sleeve options. And you just tape the pattern pieces together when you're ready to cut it out. We have a lot of customers that have made this out of knits like this one. It just has a little bias band on the neckline, or out of some of the wovens like the rayons. They drape great, and this is a nice fitting pattern. One of my favorite companies is Sewing Workshop. She has a lot of patterns made for knits. She's very professional. The designs are consistent from one pattern to another in sizing. I have made all of these patterns. This is Anne's cardigan, and it is over here on this mannequin. This is one of the art gallery knits. It's a cotton spandex blend. And the good thing with knits, most of the time the back and the front look alike. So the wrong side of this fabric shows on the shawl collar. So this was a good choice, fabric choice for this. It's really cute and has a little waist detail, a seam right here. The collar is cut in one piece, so after you get the shoulder seams sewn and the sleeves put in, you just sew the collar on and hem and you're finished. That's something else I'd like to tell you about knits. I like the set-in sleeve on knits. They make them look more fitted, and unlike woven garments, they're really easy to put in. Most of the time you set the sleeve in flat and there's no gathering or easing. You just stretch the arm's eye and make the sleeve fit, and it pops back to shape when you're through. Give it a good press and you've got a nice smooth shoulder seam right there. This one is the Memphis dress. This is one I have worn for quite a while. It's got some asymmetrical lines. Here's a little, let's see if I could show you that. The skirt has a little wing on the side. It fits great. It has a seam down the front and a nice big hemband on the bottom that makes it hang nice. I wear this with leggings. The pattern is a dress, and we've had a lot of people shorten it a bit. So this is another Sewing Workshop pattern. It's a great choice for a first knit project. The other, I have a couple of garments back here I'm going to show you too. Also from Sewing Workshop, this is the Bristol, and it is either a top or a dress. I'm pretty short, so I used the dress pattern and just shortened it a bit. It has a yoke cut in one piece, and it goes down over the shoulder. It fits great. And then there are very simple lines in the back. There's a panel with a little bead panel there. You do sew the bands on the bottom after you've hemmed the front, so everything comes out nice and even. I've made this a couple of times. You can make this in an afternoon. This is one of our ponte knits. It has a little black and white, black and charcoal pinstripe. It washes up great. If you're not familiar with ponte knits, it's a double knit for today. So don't think of it as those pants your mom used to wear. These wash up great and they're easy to sew. We have another pattern company that it's pretty new to us, we really like. It's called Closet Core. And this is their t-shirt pattern called Ebony. It's that swing tee that's real popular now. It has two sleeve versions, the set-in or the raglan sleeves. There's a crew neck or a little scoop neck, and some sleeve length variations. This is the Ebony tee. You can see it's longer in the back. This one has set-in sleeves, 3/4 length, a nice neckband, and I shortened this by 25% when I sewed it on to make it lay nice and smooth, and it has some top stitching here. This was also hemmed with a double needle, and I finished all mine with, sewed them together with a serger, so be sure and take a look at that. They go together so quick. They're so easy to wear and easy to care for. The last garment I want to show you, Peggy McQueen made this, and this is a new knit to us. It's unlike anything else we have. It's called Scuba Knit, and it too is a double knit. It has a smooth finish on the inside, and this one is suede on the outside. Some of the scuba knits have a double knit finish on both sides. So this one doesn't stretch quite as much. It's a little more stable than some of the cotton and cotton blend knits we have, but you would treat it the same way when you're sewing. So this is a new pattern from Quick Sew, and it's a shawl collar vest. There's also a jacket version on this pattern. No closures, which is also a great thing about most knit garments. They're just quick to sew together. So I think I've covered everything. If you have questions about sewing on knits, please talk to us. We can answer most of those. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa from Pink Hollybush Designs, and thanks to the wonders of technology, welcome to Connecticut and my sewing studio. It's a little bit weird that I'm just looking at my cell phone and not at any of you, but we're going to do our best here and go with it. So I'm here today to give you a couple tips on smocking with knits and to show you some Pink Hollybush patterns and some different samples. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been smocking for almost 30 years. I have my artisan certification in smocking from the Smocking Arts Guild of America, and I served as their national president from 2014 to 2016. I started Pink Hollybush Patterns a few years ago with a focus on helping sewists to smock garments particularly on knits, so that busy mamas didn't have to iron them and children would love to wear them because they're so soft and comfortable. So with that, let's talk a little bit about smocking on knits. So the first thing to know is to pick the right fabric. I have two types to recommend for you. The first one is a cotton jersey that is 95 to 97% cotton and 3 to 5% spandex elastane lycra. Now, spandex elastane and lycra are three different names for the same thing. It's spandex in the US, it's called elastane in Europe, and lycra is the trade name given to it by the DuPont Corporation that invented it in the 1950s. And it's added to that cotton jersey to give it a greater recovery and four-way stretch if they're trying to achieve four-way stretch with the garment. Now the second fabric that I would recommend is 100% cotton interlock. So either of those fabrics are a medium weight net. They're appropriate and will hold up to the wear that children are going to give them. These two nets will go through the pleater like butter, and they'll hold the shape of the pleat well. Other types of nets, like a bamboo or a rayon net, just have too much drape, and the pleats end up all wonky and are very difficult to stitch on. Plus, the fabric that's more of a slinky knit. It's just really not appropriate for children's wear. Now the Stitch and Post carries Art Gallery knits, and they are that cotton jersey that I mentioned. In fact, most of my samples that I'm going to show you today are made from Art Gallery knits. They make a wonderful product that you will get a great result with. And I know the ladies at the Stitching Post will be happy to help you just pick out the perfect knit for your first try at smocking on them. All right, so we found the perfect knit. Now it's time to pleat our fabric. So I have found that the sizing in the knit helps with the pleating. So I like to pleat the fabric before I pre-wash it. At the same time, nets can shrink. Now I found that they usually only do that in length and usually only by a ½ inch, but what my recommendation is that you cut the skirts before you pre-wash, that you go ahead and pleat, construct your garment, and then pre-wash it just before you hem it. That way any shrinkage will happen before you do that final hemming. Now when I cut my skirts, if you are worried about that shrinkage, cut the skirts an inch longer than the pattern tells you to. When I figured the yardage for Pink Hollybush patterns, I was generous. You have that extra inch if you lay out the pattern carefully to cut your skirts a little bit longer so that if it shrinks on you a little bit, when you wash and dry it, you'll still be fine. Okay, so now it's time to pleat. I have a whole video on my website that shows you exactly how I pleat nets, and Jane is going to go ahead and give you that link. I'll actually write it on the video here as well. So, but you can go, take your time, look at that and see exactly how I am pleating knit. It is very easy to do. Now I'm often asked, should I interface the pleats? And my answer to that is, okay, again, should you interface the pleats? Why? Knits are bulky, they stretch, and they are heavy. The last thing you want to do is to add to that bulk. Now you probably don't think of a knit as heavy, but quilting cotton, your regular quilting cotton that you make quilts out of, weighs 115 grams per meter. A cotton jersey is 210 grams per meter, and interlock is 225 grams per meter. That means that a cotton interlock is almost twice as heavy as a quilting cotton. So again, you do not want to add to that bulk. Let me give you another visual. So this picture is a photo of khaki puppies by Creative Keepsakes. I have a sample for you. And here they are stitched on this little May Garden jumper. And I hope you can see these are some pretty plump puppies. So again, you don't want to add to that bulk by putting any interfacing in it. I have tried it. I've experimented with different knits doing it. It's horrible. Okay, so just take my word for it or try it yourself, but do not interface the knit. If you use the cottons that I've recommended, as I said, you'll find that the pleats have enough structure to get a beautiful result smocking on them. All right, so we have our piece pleated and now we're ready to start smocking. So the first step is to have the right mindset. If you go into smocking on nets and you want that preciseness and that exactness that you can achieve with a woven, you're probably going to be frustrated. Knits have that wonderful stretch, but working with it is just a little bit different. It's hard to get that full, beautiful coverage with your smocking that you can get on a woven. But this is not the heirloom garment that is going to be handed down from generation to generation. This is the play dress that she is going to beg her mother to get out of the laundry so she can wear it again. It's the dress she's going to throw on and wear everywhere. So be kind to yourself and just embrace the difference. So how can we get the best result and the best coverage? So my first tip is use 4 strands of floss for a geometric and 5 for picture smocking. Okay? Again, because those pleats are bulky and you're trying to get good coverage. If you're using an interlock, which this little jumper is, and remember is even a little bit thicker and bulkier than the jersey, you might want to smock with 5 strands for a geometric and 6 for an interlock. And this, I'll show it again, this is 5 strands are used on that cable stitch and on these waves down here, and 6 were used for the puppies. If you are using 5 or 6 strands, then you might want to try a number 5 or a number 3 darner rather than that number 7 with your smocking. You want the hole of the needle to be large enough that every strand can lie side by side without getting smushed. And you want the hole that the needle makes in the fabric to be large enough that it's not smushing all those strands that are going through as well. Now, the next tip is to always strip and squeak your floss. If you're not familiar with that, let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. So in my needle, I have 4 strands of floss. I have separated each strand and then just threaded my needle. And I have a piece of craft felt. This is, just the ordinary inexpensive felt you pick up everywhere. I've wet it and I've wrung it out so it's just damp. And you're just going to run the thread through there like that. And I think you can see, or the floss through there, I should say, sorry, how it's nice and flat and lined up by doing that. It's called strip and squeak because sometimes you can hear the squeak when you pull it down through. I am not good at getting the squeak, but that's where the name comes from. So I do recommend, as tip number 3, that you start with a geometric smocking rather than picture smocking. Picture smocking on a knit is more difficult because you're trying to get that great full coverage. As you saw with the puppies, it can be done, but I would start with the geometric first. Knits have that wonderful stretch that makes them so comfortable, but smocking on them can be a little bit like playing the arcade game whack-a-mole. If you remember that one, you have to pound the mole down in the hole, and while you're pounding it down, they're popping up in the other holes, and you're trying to go around whacking those moles. With the knit, if you are a tight smocker, when you pull down on your stitch, that stretch of the knit is going to let it spring up in between your stitches, just like those little moles do. So you want to ease up on your tension. So to sum up, use an additional strand of floss. Make sure you strip and squeak your floss. Start with a geometric smocking plate rather than a picture one, and make sure to ease up on your tension. If you do all those things, you will have a great result with smocking on knits. Now you might be wondering, can I use my normal woven pattern with a knit fabric? And the answer is generally no. Patterns need to be made specifically for knits because of that bulk and that stretch that the knits have. Okay? The edges need to be supported in a way that still allows for the stretch to occur. The bulk needs to be minimized, and a pattern that's appropriate for a knit tends to be a simpler garment with less design details because of that bulk and that stretch. Knit patterns will support those edges with the bindings rather than facings. The bindings are usually smaller so that they can pull in and keep that knit from losing its shape over time. You will also find that pink Hollybush patterns have the smocked piece sized differently for a knit versus a woven. All right, so let's look at some patterns. The first one I want to show you is Honey. Now Honey is a workhorse of a pattern. It's your basic yoke dress in a knit. There are no closings, it's just pull on over the head and go. So Honey can be made in a short sleeve version or a long sleeve. Okay. And Honey comes with a high yoke, okay, so you can smock right below it, or Honey comes with a dropped yoke as well. And this particular one was in the summer 2020 of Classic Sewing magazine. If you're interested in the design, Stitching Post might still have a copy of it. But as you can see, you don't need to smock any of the dresses. They all can be gathered. So this is the gathered option of Honey with the dropped yoke. This, by the way, is an art gallery print that fabric that the Stitching Post might have for you. if after all of this I haven't convinced you, if you're nervous about smocking on the knits, I do have another option for you, and that is this honey. Honey can be made with an insert, and this insert is broadcloth. So it's a knit dress, and this is also an art gallery fabric, with a smocked insert on the broadcloth, and the honey pattern explains to you how to do this. Okay, so the next pattern I want to show you is not a dress, even though that's what I've been talking about, and that's twirly skirt. Now, twirly skirt, this little one was in the fall 2020 issue of Classic Sewing magazine, and this also is an art gallery fabric. So this can be smocked front and back if you like, and it's got an elastic back. And by the way, all Pink Hollybush patterns have pockets. So let me show you the pockets. If you smock the back, you can't put the pockets in, but here are, find my pockets. There they are, because every little girl needs her pockets. Now, twirly skirt can be made in both a knit or a woven. So this is actually a woven. Let me show you a couple other twirly skirts. This is the knit just gathered. So if you know your daughter or granddaughter, if you want a really quick, easy to put together and you don't want to smock it, you can go right ahead and just gather it. And I want to show you this one. I love this one. This is actually a fine wale cord that it's made out of. So cute. Now, Rosie is the latest Pink Hollybush pattern. Rosie was in the holiday 2020 issue of Classic Sewing, and also can be made with long sleeves, or this is a Rosie top with the short sleeves. Rosie can also be made in a woven like twirly skirt can, and so this is a woven Rosie, and Rosie is smocked on both the back and the front. Of course, you could choose to just gather the back if you didn't want that much smocking. And again, Rosie has her pockets. Rosie is also going to be in the upcoming issue of Classic Sewing magazine. Okay, and I have saved the last one, and that is the Make Garden jumper, and that's this little one right here. And let me show you a couple other samples. Make Garden is sleeveless. As you can see, it's big enough that you can put a top underneath it, but it is sized, the armholes come up high enough that it can be a sleeveless jumper as well. Again, here's an unsmocked version. May Garden has two different necklines. So this is the scoop neck, and this is the boat neck. Okay. And our little puppies that you've already seen is also a scoop neck. Now, I hope I've convinced you to give sewing on knits a try and smocking on them. If you need more help with sewing or smocking on knits, there is an online course for each Pink Hollybush pattern. Okay? If you're interested in seeing what they are like, there is one more Pink Hollybush pattern I haven't mentioned to you, and that is the July flowers, and Stitch and Post also has this pattern. Now this one is not for knits. This is only for wovens. This is a little Easter bunny one, but the construction for this dress, on my website you will find the entire series of videos that go through how to make every step of this pattern. It is completely free, and the Stitching Post does have this pattern in stock if you're interested in that. With the other ones, they the other patterns, as I said, there is a course for each one of them. In the pattern that you can purchase at the Stitching Post, you will find a coupon for 15% off the course price. If for some reason the coupon is not in there, just email me and tell me that you purchased the pattern at the Stitching Post, and I will make sure that you get the discount. Also, I will be leading a May sew-along on May Garden sew-along online. Registration for that will open April 15th. We will get started April 29th, and we will be stitching and sewing May Garden together through the month of May. So the sew-along, the way it works is you get lifetime access to the course. There are 3 Zoom calls with the whole group that is sewing along together, so you can get any questions answered. You can see what everyone else is doing and working on, and just have a great time kind of comparing notes and stitching along together. So if you are interested in that, again, you can grab your pattern at the Stitching Post and go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, and that way you'll be notified when registration opens, but it will be opening on April 15th. So I'm trying to think. I think that I have covered everything. Thank you for having me. I hope you will give Smocking on Knits a try, and I hope you'll give Pink Hollybush patterns a try. So have a great day and happy smocking. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you again everyone for joining us today for Viking Club. Hope that you enjoyed all of our information that we had to share with you today. We do have a couple of things coming up that we want to remind you about. First of all, a reminder about our sewing therapy, sort of open sewing class days that we have started, which everyone seems to be really enjoying. And remember that you can bring whatever project you might want to work on. You don't have to bring a quilt. It can be a garment, it can be a bag. Last week, one of the gals was in fact working on the what's the name of that shirt, Stacy?
Simple and Elegant Tee.
Simple Elegant Tee, yes. She was making a Simple Elegant Tee and had it done except for the hem pretty much when she left. So we will be happy to help you with whatever project you're working on. If you want to play around with some knits and have a little bit of support in the background while you're working, if you want to try the 10 Sisters grid, we would be happy to be here to support you to do that. With regard to the Pink Hollybush patterns and the knits for Smocking, we will pleat your knit project for you just like we will pleat your woven fabrics. So keep that in mind. If you don't have a pleater, we can pleat your knits for your Smocking projects. We have another class coming up that is a machine embroidery project class. It's the Kimberbell That's So Chenille Fruit Stand Hot Pet. And this is a really cute project. Stacy has stitched these up, and there are cherries, strawberry, there's a pear, and a peach, and these all come on the CD, and there's a variety of sizes. This is the largest size. The size that you can make will be determined by what machine you have, the largest hoop size that you have available. The one that we will be doing in class will be the pear. It has a little bit fewer fabric pieces, so you will learn the technique. This is made entirely in the hoop, so when you finish, you turn it right side out through this opening and you have a finished hot pad. So if you've never done an in the hoop project on your embroidery machine, this might be a good project for you to start with. So that will be coming up on April 29th, I believe, is the date of that class. We do have our Complete Quilting 101 series coming up. I believe the weekday class is full at this point, but the Saturday series, we do have some openings if you're interested in learning precision quilting techniques from the very, very beginning to finishing a small quilt project. So that's an excellent class. Again, we thank you for watching today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. We have lots of new fabrics in the shop, and we would love for you to come in and take a look.